Today we're going to be making a quick and easy quilt using just one layer cake plus some yardage. Now this is a fun and fast quilt pattern to make, so it's perfect for beginners. So let's get started. Now the layer cake I'm using is the Let It Bloom by Riley Blake. I just love the floral patterns. And if you don't have a layer cake, you can just cut your own 10-inch squares and you will need 42 of them. I'll put a link to a tutorial on how to cut your own layer cake squares from your yardage in the description field for this video. So I'm going to start by going through these squares and I'm going to sort them into light and dark colours. So what I'm doing here is separating the greens into light and dark, the purples into light and dark, and the same with the pinks. But you don't have to do this, you can just go random. Now I'm going to match these into pairs, so I'm just taking a light coloured square and matching it with a dark coloured square. I was thinking of matching colours, so purple with purple and green with green and so on, but I wasn't too sure how it would turn out, so I ended up just going random with the colours. Now before we continue, I'd just like to take a moment to thank Craftsy, the sponsor of today's video. Now being part of the Craftsy community is like having a personal quilting mentor right at your fingertips. You'll learn how to make projects from experts at your own pace, anytime, anywhere. And the classes cover everything you need to know from beginner basics to advanced techniques. I've been with Craftsy for a long time now and I'm continually finding new skills and tips and hints from the classes provided. There are over 2,000 incredible Craftsy classes including quilting, sewing, crocheting, knitting, cooking and so many more topics. Now something that tends to trip up newcomers to quilting is getting a perfect 1/4 inch seam, and while I was browsing Craftsy I came across this really helpful video by Colleen Tauki who shows you a number of methods to test your 1/4 inch seam, and I think you'll find it very helpful. And this is just one of the many tips and hints you can find on Craftsy. There's always something new to learn. Another project I found is the all-in-one pincushion and trash bag that hangs from your sewing desk to catch all those scraps and threads. I currently use one of my fabric baskets that I made from jelly rolls, but it sits on my desk and I think it would be nice to have one that hangs down. So this is another to add to my to-do list. Now if you'd like to learn new skills or hone up skills you already have, then the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the video description will get a full year of premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49. It's the perfect way to stay inspired and keep creating all year long. Now let's get back to the tutorial. Now once I'm happy with the pairings, I'll take one pair and place one of the squares face up on my mat and then take the matching piece and place it face down on top. And then I'm going to take my ruler and my friction pen and draw a diagonal line across the square. I usually do this on the light coloured fabric as my friction pen shows up more clearly on the lighter fabrics. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew along both sides of that line using a 1/4 inch seam, and I'll repeat that with all of the squares that I have here. So I have them all sewn now and I'm going to take one of them and place my ruler along that line that I drew and cut. You can see that this results in 2 pieces, and when I open them up I now have 2 half square triangles, and I'll go ahead and repeat that with all of the squares. So I have all of my layer cakes cut and you can see that I have pressed the seams to one side. I usually just press to the dark side of the fabric. And now I'm going to cut off all these dog ears. I like using these little scissors for this. I'll put a link in the description field for where to find them. At this point you could also trim your squares if you want to be sure that they are square, but I'm not going to do that. These seem to be pretty good and they ended up coming together nicely, so we were happy we didn't have to bother doing all that work to square them up. For my contrasting fabric I'm using white, although we did audition a couple of other colours to see what might work, but the white won out in the end. And from this white I'm going to cut 7 strips, but just bear in mind that if you have less than 42 inches of usable fabric you may need to cut 8 strips. These strips are 3.5 inches wide, but you can cut these larger or smaller depending on how you want the finished pattern to look. Watch to the end to see an example of this. Now once my strips are cut, I'm now going to subcut them into 3.5 inch squares. Now if you have 42 inches of usable fabric, you should get 12 squares from each strip. So I have all of my squares cut, and for this step I'm going to give you two different methods, so go with the one that suits you. Now for method 1, I'm going to take 2 of the white squares and place them face down on my mat, and then I'll take my ruler and draw a line with my friction pen diagonally across each of them. Then I'll take those squares and place them on the corners of each side of the main half square triangle, as you can see here. So they should run parallel to the middle seam of the half square triangle. And now we just need to sew directly over those lines. I personally like to pin them in place as I find it just helps to keep everything lined up. Once the squares are sewn on, I'm going to find the 1/4 inch line on my ruler and line it up with the line I drew on the square. And then I'll cut, and you can see that we end up with some waste here, but make sure to watch through to method 2 to see how we get round this. But for now I'm just going to repeat the cut on the other side. And when I open these out, you can see what the block looks like. Now at this point, don't do any heavy pressing, as I'll show you further on how to press them so that the seams will nest. For the second method, I'm going to take 2 white squares and again draw a line diagonally across each of them, but this time I'm also going to draw a second line 1/2 inch from the first line. And I'll place them in the same way as I did in method 1 so that the lines are all running parallel with the middle seam. Now just make sure that the shorter lines are closest to the corners. And now I'll go ahead and I'll sew along each of these lines. Now that I've sewn along both lines, I'm going to take my ruler and line it up 1/4 inch from the first line. In other words, I'm cutting through the middle of these 2 sewn lines. And now, as you can see, instead of bits of scrap, we now have a half square triangle. And I'll go ahead and repeat that on the other side, and there is my second half square triangle, this time with a different design. So it's really just a personal preference what you do here. Method 1 results in less sewing, but you end up with scraps, and method 2 results in more sewing, but you end up with a bunch of pre-done half square triangles that you can use in another project. Now it's time to head over to the design floor and start laying these out. And once I'm happy with the layout, I'm going to go ahead and sew 4 of the blocks together to form a large block. However, in order to get the seams to nest, we need to press these in a certain way. It's pretty simple once you know how, but it took us a bit of time to work it out. So for these 2 blocks, all of the seams are pressed in the same direction towards the center of the block, and for the other 2 blocks, all of the seams are pressed towards the outside of the block. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these blocks together. So I'll start with the bottom 2 blocks and then the top 2 blocks, and I'll sew them with a 1/4 inch seam. And you can see how nicely everything nests because of the way we've pressed those seams. So I've sewn them together, and just before I complete the block, I want to show you how I press the center seams, and I press the bottom seam towards the right and the top seam towards the left. Now I'll go ahead and sew them together to form the block, and I'll repeat that with all of the blocks in the quilt. And just note that for the top row, you will only be forming a half a block. So I have my big blocks completed, and now I'm ready to sew them together into rows. So I'll sew them together into pairs first and then sew them into rows, and I'll do that all the way up the quilt. Now that the rows are sewn, I'll just show you how I press the seams that I just sewed. And as always, I press them in alternating directions. So on the bottom row, the seams are pressed to the right, and on the next row up, they're pressed to the left, and then the next row to the right, and so on all the way up the quilt. So now I'm going to go ahead and sew all of these rows together to form the quilt top. I'm really happy with how the quilt turned out overall. I do love the floral designs, and I think this layer cake would be ideal for a young girl. The quilt came together so quickly and easily, definitely a project you could finish over a weekend. And as I promised, here is an example of a different size square that we used for this block. So as I mentioned, you don't need to use 3.5 inch squares. You can go with a bigger diamond in the centre, and you can see here that I've made this table runner using 4 inch squares. And you can even go bigger if you like. It's entirely up to you how you want your finished pattern to look. So thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this tutorial, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more.